Just giving a little background on both myself and on the Working Safe equals Living Safe project that we've been doing. This continued on from the MAP project, which some of you may be familiar with from that finished last year. And we developed a range of different things that we can do, and we were given a little bit of extra funding to be able to produce this. And then I've been going all around the country doing these face-to-face as well as doing the webinars. I'll go straight into the points of what we're going to be talking about today, or what I'm going to be talking about anyways. Some of the issues and potential issues for young people. Providing support and advice through mentoring, including on an ongoing basis of what it means to be a mentor. Motivating and confidence building through the mentoring model as well. So important. How we empower people with the tools and knowledge to identify and resolve the issues autonomously, meaning that we're going to give them the tools to be able to do it for themselves rather than having to wait for someone else to do it for them or thinking that that's the only way to go. And then lastly, the power of positive role models from all our areas of our community. So the first questions I suppose we have to ask is, what are the issues and who is actually at risk of being disengaged? As I've been travelling around the country doing these sessions face-to-face, some of the issues that have been brought up by participants have been first job is a very big issue for people, having no job, moving out of home, staying at home, finding that work-life study balance. And this happens a lot with especially school-based apprentices and trainees perhaps, where they're just trying to work out how they're going to manage to do all of these things within their lives. Other points that came up were family breakdown, the internet or social media, and social media. Also, the diversity in the workplace, having to work with people that they perhaps haven't worked with before, people's personalities, a totally different environment, especially if it's their first job from school. And then who's at risk? Now, this is focused obviously on young people. However, my view is that most of these items, or most things that we're going to talk about today, are actually for anyone within the workforce or within a school environment. It could be new employees, returning to work employees from maternity leave or long service, sick leave, change of department, which happens quite a lot, a change of management, a change of business ownership, people not being aware of what's going on. We often talk about disengaged youth or disengaged people quite a lot, and we focus a lot on that. There's a lot of information on it, and we spend a lot of time on these areas. But usually disengaged is where the people feel alienated, disconnected, undervalued, unable to contribute. So whilst we do spend a lot of time on this area, I think also we don't spend enough time on some of the other sections or different types of engagements that there are. It's a bit like the old days of a classroom where we remember the naughty ones and the good ones, and the ones in the middle sometimes get lost. So other types of engagement can be engage with risk. So, they're going along okay, but activities or people that they're engaged with or different sorts of demands on them mean that they are at risk of going down to, or up to that next level of disengagement. Another part of this is also the under-engaged. And this is often where we see, especially in traineeships, The data has been collected and discussions and things that we've had with young people, especially through the MAP project, because it gave us the opportunity to get feedback from just over 3,500 apprentices and trainees through that project, that quite often it was that they were under-engaged in what they were doing, especially in the workplace, as it was focused on that apprenticeship model. So these were the ones who perhaps, the thought process wasn't put into place as well as it could be for them to be able to be engaged in the workplace. Now, we all understand, and I certainly do, that, most jobs, there are the things that we have to do that we're not particularly excited about, shall we say. However, a bit of thought process that if you had to do the same thing over and over and over again without knowing where you're headed can also then create that under-engagement where they then will progress to being disengaged. Of course, we all like people who are engaged. That is the best part. However, there is still that possibility that, whilst to everyone's view they're going along fine, there is also that thing that they need sometimes once they're engaged to be stretched. So again, we'll talk more about that further on. And lastly is the over-engaged. And sometimes you often see, and again this was feedback from that I experienced in the Northern Territory and Western Australia with the MAP project, was that some were over-engaged. In other words, they were doing way too much, trying to fit too much in, pressures and all that sort of thing. So yes, whilst they're being successful, they're also at that risk of tipping over. So they need to be perhaps mentored and talked to about what is important and what they can actually succeed in or do better at. And they do, of course, run that risk of burnout or emotional stress over that sort of thing. There is some more information on that that will come out with the handouts at the end of this session as well, that will be emailed to you. So what are young people or new employees telling us? And this is, again, research that was from that MAP project that we used. The number one reason for resigning was quite surprising to me in some ways. It was that they didn't feel like they fitted in, or I don't feel like that I fit in. So they weren't felt welcome, they weren't understanding, the nuances of a workplace, and that was the main reason. Of course, there was the other reasons that were said as well, which was that the job was not what I expected, and this is where, through the school systems and work experience, but good work experience, not just turning up and the old days where we used to stuff envelopes, but good and productive work experience programs can step in and help with that. So they actually do get a reality check of what something is, what is actually about. And then some other ones, the boss, the supervisor, and of course, as usual, the pay. Other research from that project came back with 90% who participated in a mentoring program of some description said that they were or about to participate in were looking forward or excited to having the prospect of a mentor. So somebody who was actually designated as that person as opposed to, not wearing the name badge, so to speak. And then once that they were in some sort of formalised mentoring program, almost close to 100% who were considering resigning actually did start to think about things differently after having a mentor. So let's look at the workplace. So what's changed? The old back in my day conversation. Multiple workplaces. I'll use the example of trainees and apprentices in the Territory where I was working in the last few years. Within some of the programs within the NT government, trainees then were placed in different agencies and were moved usually every 3 months. So they had multiple workplaces and different styles, different organisations within government that they went and did their traineeship with. And whilst that's fantastic that they get a look at all different types of the business, it also then created confusion of because things were operated in a different way. This has changed. We did put in place the MAP project style into the agencies and worked very hard with the agencies up there to make sure that they did try and do things on a similar way, so as they moved it became an easier process. So it is possible even within a large organisation like that. Other things that have changed is multiple masters. You know, we've all seen fabulous org charts and who's who in the zoo things, and sometimes it's not clear who really is the supervisor or who do I answer to. We all know the research of workplace social, family support, those things have changed. I know since when I first started out and within our communities. Technology, that's a given. I know when I started work many moons ago, we didn't have computerised systems. So all of those things and the changes that have happened in our workplace has been amazing, and it keeps changing. And then lastly, it's that FIFO, which is not first in, first out, for those who might think it's that. It's the FIFO as in fly in, fly out. And whilst FIFO has been around for a long time, that also has changed the workplace over the past few years of how things are. And then in brackets there, this came from an apprentice in the Northern who was coming to the Northern Territory to a project there, who was a FIFO apprentice, and it was walk away, spend, live elsewhere. So he had no connection to where he was as far as the camp side of things. He wasn't, going home on his break to family and that sort of stuff, or having, wife and child or whatever it was at home. So he felt no connection to where he was. There was no real home or place. So that also makes a big difference and is a change from what it was in previous times. So all those things might have changed in the last few years. However, some things haven't. We all left school at the top and we all started work at the bottom in most cases. So those things, they're the same. And what we sometimes have to do is think back to where we were or put ourselves in their shoes of what that was like. And I think sometimes we forget that, and we need to be reminded that, we did start at the bottom at some stage and what it was like and what it felt like. I'm not sure the OMG factor or the oh my God factor was quite the term that was used, but it's still that whole new ball game of starting out. That hasn't changed. Walking into a new job, doing something different, new technology, all those sort of things, that hasn't changed. There's still that factor comes into it. Other things like probation pressure, actually understanding what probation is with a new job. That hasn't changed either. And of course that dollar figure, we all want more for what we do. That hasn't changed either. So why mentoring? I think this is a really good statement to sort of sum it up. So mentoring is a trusting relationship, usually between someone who has less experience than we do and someone who does want to help out, who wants to offer that guidance, support and encouragement. I mean, there's lots of different statements out there of what it is, but that's basically what mentoring is about. It's sharing information, being a resource for someone. So just while you sit there, if you think about it, how long did it take you to feel comfortable in your first job or your current role, depending on what you're doing at the moment? As I've been doing this face-to-face around the country, it's usually ranged between 3 and 6 months, sometimes longer. And then usually ask the next question, well, okay, if you think about your first job taking you 6 months to feel confident or comfortable in it, then think about your job now with years of experience from then. It might get a little easier, but we still take time. And again, we need to think back and remember and show that patience perhaps. And the other question there was that, was there someone who helped you, focused you, shared a few experiences? Now, we may not have put a name badge on it, saying that they were my mentor, but I'm sure most of us, or if not all of us, have someone in our lives at some stage who's, taken you aside or spoken to you or inspired you through a mentoring sort of role. And it doesn't matter who you are or what age you are, mentoring is actually beneficial for anyone. It's not because you're broken, it's because you want to experience more or get better at what you do. I know for myself, coming from Queensland to the Territory a few years ago, I did find that whilst I thought I was quite informed on Indigenous issues, I got there and I realised that I knew nothing or very little. So for myself, I sourced out a few people that I got along well with, and they basically became my mentors so that I got better at what I did, especially when I went out into community and other sort of things that I ended up doing through the MAP project up there. So I developed them into being my mentors. Again, I didn't put a badge on it, but I did use them in that way. So, getting back to that life experience, I'm not quite sure how many are online. I can't see that from sunny Queensland. However, Kerry could probably tell me. If you think about it, if you average it out, I'm sure with the amount of people that perhaps are online at the moment, we have hundreds and hundreds of hours of experience. Again, when I do this face-to-face, we add it up. And yesterday I was with NEC, a company that's embraced this quite full-on throughout the country. And the group that I was talking to there, we had 500 and something hours of just experience if you looked at it from the point of view of how long it is since you left school or started your first job. And so within your own organisations, doing that exercise sort of goes, well, hang on a second, we have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of things that we can help with. And I may not know everything, I'm sure none of us do, but someone else within the organisation is bound to, especially when you're working with a mentee and you have a question or something that you can't answer. Think about the people that are around you and the amount of information that collectively that we have. So what does it mean to be a mentor, or what's a terminology, or what is a mentor? Again, these are some words that came out of the sessions that we've been doing. Oh, my screen just went strange. Just one moment. Oh, there we go. Oh, technology, my friend. There you go. So obviously they are friendly. Doesn't mean you're the best mate, but it does mean that you are a friend to them, or will talk in a friendly manner. Someone who motivates is another word that was brought up. A companion, someone who walks the path beside someone. A confidant, so they know a mentor needs to be has a mentor and a mentee needs to have trust so that they can come to you and speak openly and honestly, and also know that it's not going to go any further. They can, speak to you in that manner. Some other descriptions that came up is a supporter, a sounding board. I really like that one because it's where someone can, again, solve their own problems or their issues and discuss it, and they've got someone to bounce that off. A resource. Again, harping back to that, how many years of experience of work life and other information that we've gathered in our years since being an adult. A huge resource of information. And I sometimes think, again, I think we forget how much information we actually have. Other ones are a role model, a negotiator. So perhaps sometimes having to be in the middle, not going and fixing it for someone, but having that negotiation skills. A guide, an advisor. And the last one there is coach. I'm a little bit, coach is a great word. However, we do try to separate someone who's a workplace coach, meaning the how-to, to someone else, to a mentor rather. Some of the things we also talk about too is, what a mentor isn't. They're not a rescuer. They're not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. We're not their parent, a cool peer, or a social worker, even though sometimes I think sometimes we are. So with that point of coaching versus mentoring, coaching needs to be sort of defined, I suppose, is that a coach is usually the supervisor, so they're the how-to person. And a coach can be one-on-one, but it also can be to a group. Whereas a mentor normally isn't your supervisor or something like that. The best one is that they are two separate people. However, we do all understand and that business requirements sometimes do require that the coach and the mentor is the same person, or the buddy is the same person. So that's where the different hats sometimes has to be worn. And mentoring should be one-on-one. Group mentoring, that sort of thing, really doesn't, whilst it has its place, it isn't the way to go. It needs to be one-on-one, because otherwise people sometimes don't speak up or don't say things in a larger group. So just in explanation of all of that, coaching is to do and mentoring is to be. So the how-to versus the where you want to head to as a holistic model. When we look at employees or young people or whoever it might be, we also need to think about, inspiring people as well. This is very much a supervisory type sort of skill, which is lost or not given in the first place. But some of those things in the Wordle are energising, they're empowering. Things like goal setting, conflict resolution, huge thing that needs to be, it's not something that's learnt, it's not something, it is something that it's learnt, it's not something that's inherent in someone. They need to learn, people need to learn how to resolve conflict in an appropriate way. And it's building that resilience in people as well. So then when you might be a person who's actually looking at thinking, well, okay, I need to groom some people in our workplace to become a mentor. So you need to think about what sort of things you want them to cover, or what sort of ideas or things that you want to discuss with the person that they're going to mentor within that, and think about how they're going to do that. I usually stop about here and say, any questions, Kerry? Oh, she's gone to sleep.
Here I am. No, it doesn't look like there's any questions at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Kerry.
No problem.
Just to explain, Kerry and I are in two different states at the moment. I'm in Queensland and she's in South Australia at our head office, so we're not sitting at the same end of the table.
No, I don't have any questions. Everyone seems to be clear, but please feel free to pop them in and I will be more than happy to interrupt Sharon and let her know.
Thanks, Kerry. Ah, dear. Thanks, Kerry. So now we'll just go on to some tools to assist. So again, this is a very brief session and there's far more information that will be sent out to you as well, but just an overview of some of the things that are helpful or things to think about again when you are either preparing someone to be a mentor in your workplace or in your organisation, or whether it's for your own benefit as well. And whilst most of this is not reinventing the wheel, I do believe we do need to be reminded of them sometimes. So if you look at this sort of slide, you can agree or disagree, you can think about it. But usually what somebody is actually saying in a conversation only makes up about 7% of what's actually being heard. How you say it, the tone of your voice is a big part, and then that body language of what someone is saying. So especially things like the visual too, if you're talking to a mentee for the first time, you know, how are they looking? What's their body language like? Is it open? Is it closed? And the hardest part is that, unfortunately, in our world that we live in, with technology, quite often we don't do face-to-face conversations anymore, just like this one. So I get no feedback of what's going on either. So that makes it quite a difficult thing to do. So when we are thinking of emailing or texting, I know myself, if sometimes I'll write an email or something and I will redo it 40, 50 times, it seems, because I'm thinking about the tone and how it's going to be perceived or what I'm saying, because that is lost. And I'm sure all of us have many examples of where something was misunderstood from just because you read a certain tone into a communication that was done electronically as opposed to face-to-face. I am a great believer of actually talking to people, and then if you do need to follow up and have that email trail or some sort of whatever, then do that afterwards. But I think that is lost, and I think we need to get up and actually walk and talk sometimes. Again, very simple things of effective questioning. Actually thinking about the questions you're going to ask. There is no point in not using open-ended questions or ones that require more than just a yes or no answer. And thinking about quality questioning for that purpose. Using things like, tell me about, describe it for me, explain it for me. And this also is a coaching technique as well, because most people, if you ask them if they understand, they will automatically say yes, because they don't want to say no or appear silly or stupid or something like that. So really thinking about it. And also, perhaps you're meeting your mentee for the first time, have some questions ready. You are the more experienced person in the relationship, so you need to be the one who has those questions at the ready. And again, there's some really good examples that will get sent out to you. But just getting to know you questions if you don't know that person to start with. Like what would you like to get out of this relationship, this mentoring relationship? What about goal setting? All sorts of things like that that might be effective in being prepared for that particular moment. Then once you've sort of broken through that barrier of that first meeting or that first discussion, you may get a little bit deeper on it if you like, or a bit more probing on it, and find out a little bit more detail of what's going on, because you've developed that relationship for them. And then you're looking at things like stretching them as well.
Sharon, sorry, may I just interrupt? I've just got a question here. One of the questions is, if you're not doing non-face-to-face communication, how do you make up for the 55%?
If you're not doing... Can you say that again?
If you are... Sorry.
Sorry,
that was my terrible way. If you are doing non-face-to-face communication, how do you make up for the 55%?
Excellent. That's actually a valid point. I suppose you have to think about what you're actually asking. So the questions, I suppose it comes down to the types of questions that you're asking. If you're not doing it face-to-face, so you don't have those visual clues, you really need to think about those questions that you're asking. Because again, if you don't use open-ended, if you don't use open-ended questions, then that will create a conversation, if you like. Does that help? Does that make sense? Thinking on the go.
It does.
But it needs to be that you, to me, you have to put a lot more work into non-face-to-face discussions. So you need to really think about what you're trying to achieve and what information you're trying to get. Because otherwise, if you just did closed questions, everybody would just say, how are you doing? Good. You know.
Yeah, and we've got just a couple of comments following saying that as human beings, basically we're always going to need to speak. So yeah, people commenting on that as well. Thank you, Sharon.
That's right. And also too, thinking of it, whilst we may not be in the same room, a bit like Kerry and I do, there is still other ways to do non-face-to-face, and whether it be over Messenger and the internet of talking and things like that, because even talking will make a better communication between two people as opposed to written questions. But if written is all you've got or typed in, then you really have to concentrate and think about those questions that you're going to ask so that you do get the response that sort of tells you enough information for you to then move on to the next part. That's a great question. What else do I have? Oh, and that's right, a non-judgmental. So to me, that's avoiding questions that start with why. You know, why did you do that? Because that obviously then sort of judges that the person has actually done something wrong. It's a negative. Again, some basics on listening skills. There are 4 recognised levels of listening, and there's a lot more information on this. But just as a basic tool, cosmetic listening, which, you know, sometimes we're all guilty of that one, most of the time, and being able to do it. Conversational, which is usually the response type thing. I say something, you listen, you respond. And then there's active listening, and this is the one, again, this is not inherent in people, this needs to be learned. And this is where the listener is using more effort to listen and process that information than actually talking themselves. And sometimes it's to the point of teaching someone or getting them to learn to, to make sure that someone understands me or that I understand what they're saying. And show that I'm being active in it is to jot things down, is to write down some points, and then paraphrasing it back in my own words, because that shows understanding, and I've processed that information, and it creates that active bond between people. And then there's deep listening, which I always struggle to come up with examples to this that aren't silly. But it usually takes a long time. It's probably something more like where you might go to some people have given some examples of like a motivational type speaker or a concert or something like that, where it wouldn't matter what anyone else was saying around you. They have engaged you so much, you know, that bombs could go off and you were still really in that moment. Problem solving is also the next sort of thing that we'll head to now. And I have this feeling that problem solving is almost like complaint handling in some ways, if you think about stages of that. Guiding a young person through that problem solving process can be challenging, rewarding, but keeping them focused and encouraging and support to actually get them to, again, it's not inherent, a behaviour that needs to be learnt to actually sort out their issues. Acknowledging the problem, defining the problem, coming up with some ideas, developing a plan, coming back to it, reviewing and evaluate. There has to be some sort of evaluation on most things that we decide to do. I actually have again, there's plenty of things out there, and there's lots of different models and ideas of things. I think this is probably, in my opinion, the simplest and easiest one to do. And there's plenty of templates of this. This is not new. This has been around forever. But it is the easiest way or the easiest solution to actually give someone a template of this with those boxes, a few lines on each side, and they can actually, sometimes writing it down helps, especially if someone's learning that problem-solving skill at that time. A template of that given, write it down. That sort of process can be really good, or done electronically if you happen to be doing it that way. So looking at the situation, say what it is. What is the problem? And again, writing it down sometimes can clarify it for someone. Options, what could we do? Good things, bad things, disadvantages and advantages. And then what's the solution after discussing that? And as a good mentor, you're going to go through those stages. You may come up with a couple of ideas of options, and again help with the disadvantages, good things, bad things, and of those each of those options. But then with your guidance, then the best solution based on that information that you've discussed, the mentee can come up with their own solution to it. And these sort of templates can be used for simple things. With a mentor might be advising, talking about, they want to buy a car even. And whilst we're not financial advisors, we're not car dealers, however, it might be a case of thinking about that. It could be moving out. Again, another issue that came up as one of the things that mentees have said to us is an issue. So those sort of things. Changing habits, working better, getting up out of bed even, perhaps. Very simple, very easy to use.
Sharon, we've just got a question from Karen. She just wants to know, how do you take notes and maintain rapport with your mentoree?
That's a good point. I suppose I meant them, if we're referring back to where I said about active listening with making some notes, I mean like a dot point or something to remind you of what's being discussed, as opposed to not taking word for word what they're saying or something like that. Mine is more like dot points so that I get it clear in my head. That's the sort of thing I was talking about with that, and that's also a complaint handling skill as well. So that's so that you can then, you may not see, so they may bring something up, that their dog was at the vet, because you're just having a chat. So that next time you may not see that person again for another month or 3 weeks or whatever it might be. So you can then refer back to your notes as well and go, oh, how's the dog? And hopefully it hasn't anything worse happen, but it does give you that prompting, and it shows that you are actively listening to what the person is sharing with you. Hope that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Sharon. Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad it did to you, Kerry. Another thing that comes up as well, is, as I said before, is that paraphrasing, putting it into your own words. So that clarification of I'm really behind with my assignment, that's the statement that was made. However, what does it really mean? And that's where, as a good mentor, you'll get to what's behind that statement. So they're not going to make the deadline. That could be it. Excuse me. Or it could be that they actually haven't started it yet. It could be that they don't understand it. There's a whole range of things that could be behind that statement, especially with VET. Quite often, performance criteria, those sort of things can be quite confusing or understanding to someone. So they're the sort of things that you need to not just take it on face value, perhaps. And now I've got some examples of those sort of statements that have been made, and these are real, from some students through some mentoring programs that we did. I took these from Northern Territory ones. This is what was said to a mentor. I think they got an official warning from work because they didn't let them know. And so they were concerned. So the mentor then went back and said, well, hang on a second, was it an official warning, or did someone just say it was an official warning? Official usually means they've done it a number of times in a row. So they went into the background of it as well. So sometimes it's not what it seems. Another one was that they never have any money. And again, that mentor went back to that mentee and started talking about, well, okay, why? Do you, do you have a budget? What do you spend, have you thought about how you spend your money? And they didn't, again, not financial advice, but gave them some tools. This one in particular actually gave them a link to, I think it was the ASIC site, to, there's some financial planning and stuff on there that they used for, as an example for them. And just a simple thing, keep tabs of what you're doing. Simple stuff. We often have this one where, you don't have to keep mentoring me, I'm all right. Well, we have this thing that maybe sometimes the perception is that somebody being mentored means that they're broken, and that's not the case. Mentoring is, as I've said earlier, for everyone, and it means that then you can be stretched. So that would be an explanation that discussion, that comment could lead to. I might just do one more so that I don't go too far over time as I normally do. I quite like this one because I didn't come top of my class and I really thought I would. Maybe this isn't the career for me. I often came across, and through my vet work life as well, is that quite often, especially if they've come straight from school and they've been in the world of ABCs, they come into a different assessment process that vocational education has. So you're either competent or you're not yet competent. And I have had ones that go, well, why am I only getting a C? Because they don't understand, or they haven't listened, and orientation was so long and long-winded and they really didn't get it. So they were quite confused with what was going on. So that could be what's behind that particular statement. Again, there's other things that it could be as well. I might just flick through. I like the second one here, which is the lecturer teaches me one way to do things and then my boss wants it done another. So as a mentor, I would ask them, what is the task? And hopefully I have some understanding of what that task is. And quite truthfully, if there's no workplace health and safety issue with it, it could be just a case of the way that there are, explaining that there are many different ways sometimes to achieve the same outcome. And a good mentor will explain that, especially if they've been in the same field or industry, so that they can explain it. And I'll just do the last one as well, that again, this was, everyone else has completed their practical, the results are really good, I'm the only one who hasn't done it, so I mustn't be as good as the others. And this reflected on the fact it's a bit like, my surname is Warren, my sons, of course, are always last or towards the end of anything that happens. So something as simple as that, what's their surname? It could be that they've just haven't quite got there yet, or they haven't done their theory before their practical. So there's a lot more in that statement that could be read, that could be behind it. It also could be, everybody's not perfect, so it could be that the lecturer or the person doing the practical assessment might have forgotten. Something as simple as that. So those questions, and again, giving them tools then to go and ask why that hasn't happened. The point of all this, I suppose, is to sort of just don't take things on face value, that as a good mentor, you're going to use questioning to find out what is actually behind it, or whether it does mean something else, or a lack of understanding in some way. So, key points of a mentor. Communication is the key. The idea is that we talk to them, we're not telling them. It's not, back in my day stuff. Being prepared and good questioning, I can't stress that enough, that you need to, especially in the early part of a mentoring relationship, which usually does have 3 stages, that initial part is that we have the right questions to ask, we're confident in our questions to get the ball rolling. And if there are any communication barriers, so you can see that they're having difficulty, perhaps they haven't had a positive relationship with an adult before. all sorts of things. Identify them early and start working on them to develop that relationship that's needed and that trust. So really, why mentoring? I think being a mentor is probably one of the most rewarding things that can ever happen to a person, and having that role. I had an experience with NEC in Darwin, and we had a reflection session after a year of the workplace mentors working with school-based apprentices. And one of the fellows who did have a young chap who did issues as well, shall we say, and he said to me that at the end of the day, he said, I learnt more than what I think he did. He said, I learned about myself, I learned how to be patient, and he said, at the end of the day, I think I'm a better person from it. And that to me, as a mentor, is fantastic, that you are making a difference. Obviously on community as well, it, on the bigger picture, those sort of things as well, having engaged young people who are into what they're doing, whether it be work, but also within the community at large, the world's going to be a better place. And this is the way to do it. Oh, hello, Kerry.
Sorry. Hi, Sharon. I've just got Monica. She just said 3 stages. Can you please clarify?
I can. The 3 stages is basically the beginning stage, as in the sort of developing a relationship. The middle is where there might be some stretching and going to the next level of, it could be offering advice on career paths, or if they're doing further study perhaps, or, all those sort of things is that middle stage. So you're looking at more in-depth stuff. And then the last stage is a conclusion, because there usually is an end to a mentoring relationship, and that needs to be, reflected upon and that sort of thing. What I will do, there's actually a whole part of this that I will, Kerry, perhaps we might be able to add on to, that gives a better description than me doing it straight off the top of my head, that we can add into the stuff that we send out at the end.
Sure,
okay.
No problem.
Thank you. And where was I? Oh, there. And, there is that sort of the positive relationships and things that obviously young people will get, because what you want too is that someone who has been through a positive mentoring relationship as a mentee, they will then become a mentor to the next generation, or the next person down, or the next apprentice level down, or whatever it might be. So it sort of creates that ongoing effect of that whole process. Competence, confidence, connection, character, caring and contribution as well are those 6 C's of youth development. And they're the sort of things that we need to make sure that we try and get that mentee talking about their interests with their competence, what they're doing. If you're talking about work stuff as well, finding that out. Talking about confidence and building that confidence and how they actually talk to people, and you as the mentor being open and honest and trusting, and developing that trust in that relationship, and that's a very big point. Giving them connections, whether it be in a work or a private, in a personal life type of situation as well, but being respectful of their privacy, and that you are there when they're needed. And it is that caring behaviour as well, so it is that sort of do as I do as opposed to do as I say. Also discuss perhaps, contribution, whether it be, again, as I said, moving on to being a mentor themselves, or it could be volunteer work, it could be a one-off cause, it could be all sorts of different things that create that contribution to the bigger picture. Pressing my buttons too quick. Apologies, I am conscious of the time. We also look at, there's a little bit there on advantages of a diverse workforce as well, increased productivity, making sure that this diversity in our workplace, whether it be young, old, different nationalities, all those sort of things, as a workplace, if that's the mentoring look that you are focusing on from an internal sort of model, building the synergy in teams, making sure that people communicate well, all that sort of mentoring type workplace does actually make someone want to come to work each day. If somebody has a good workplace and has an workplace, the chances are, even though the work might be a little bit mundane or doesn't inspire them particularly, they're more likely to stay and then be hopefully engaged and do better or get that interest going, as opposed to the other way around when they'll leave. Just in conclusion, just to finish off, we know that, and whilst this does say young people, I think you can almost get a black texture and take that out. It's people who feel valued and provided with the opportunities to participate are less likely to experience disengagement. Straight fact. We need to do this. We need to keep people engaged. Otherwise, they will head towards other paths, and we need to, as a group of people with many, many years of experience, promoting that engagement is so important, and sharing that information of those hundreds of years that I talked about earlier. Anyone who feels engaged will have that better quality of life and feel like that they're contributing and building better communities. And quite often our schools are an exceptional example of this sort of thing, of what they do within their school community. In the long term, people who feel valued, feel connected, have better health and mental health as adults. They do. The research is out there. It shows us that if you do feel that, they will have a better outcome in those areas. And lastly, just when people are engaged, alienated or disengaged, then obviously the reverse happens. There is a greater risk of poor health, mental health difficulties, social problems, and so forth. It goes on. So we know from the research, we know from our own experiences that these sort of things can happen. So important. Just to finish off, livingsafetogether.gov.au is a little bit further information, especially with disengaged or radicalisation of youth, which is another step again. They are the funders of this particular project as well. Australian Multicultural Foundation, that email address, again, you will be sent these. And of course, Vet Network ourselves, we have a huge amount of information that's available to go further with this after this short presentation that we've done today. So I've got on there about the Leading and Driving Change. This is a biannual conference that Vet Network holds. The last one was a couple of years ago in Darwin, which I had the pleasure of, when I first started, to assist with. But this one is going on the Gold Coast, at the Gold Coast Convention Centre in July. So if you are interested in that, please contact Kerry or Janine, and also membership with Vet Network Australia, because it does allow you to access professional learning, also networking opportunities, publications, and of course discounts too to the conference coming up in July too. So if you have any questions or queries on that, please don't hesitate to contact Head Office and Kerry and Janine, who look after that. So I thank you for your time this morning. I think I've done quite well. I'm just over my time. I can't help it. And enjoy the rest of your day. And please, if you have any questions or queries, you will be sent out a certificate to say that you attended today. And as I said, some of that information that in a bit more detail. And if you do have any questions or queries, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharon, and thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry.